Welcome to PR Powerhouse, helping female entrepreneurs to get in the press and to gain PR. I'm Jo Swan, and I'll be sharing how to harness the power of the media to boost your credibility and business visibility, no matter what stage in business you're at. Because I'm on a mission to show you that PR is not just for the big boys. In this show, you'll learn how to reach out to journalists and own your place in the press, because you are ready to become a PR powerhouse. Hello and welcome to episode 6. Today we are talking about how to pitch to journalists. So this episode is now quite a nitty-gritty one where we're getting down to some of the how elements of securing your PR success. Because once you have nailed your story and you have got confident in being able to share it, and you've decided what it is that you are trying to say, you've decided what your zones of genius are that you're going to own, you are ready to share that knowledge, then you've got to make that next move. And that next move is sometimes the thing that is just where everything stops. Sometimes that is the point when everyone gives up, when they run for the hills, when they run scared, when they decide that actually, I am not going to do this. Because that's the point when you've then got to actually communicate with the people who can help you get that message out there, the journalists. So when it comes to pitching to journalists, I know there's a bit of fear around this. I know that actually it terrifies a lot of our clients, the thought of having to actually pitch to journalists. And the reason that is because of how we build this up in our minds, how we place so much gravitas on the journalists, how we kind of build them up to be these potentially big, scary figures who have our success in their hands. We overplay their role massively, and we overplay their power over us in a way as well. And we often kind of compare the idea of calling up a journalist to the idea of when you had to call up like your childhood sweetheart. So, like back in the day, if you were trying to really build up that courage to make that phone call, that old school phone call on an actual telephone, and you were nervous and your heart was beating and you ran over in your mind so many times what you were going to say before you even dared to pick up the phone. And then you imagined all the things that could go wrong, that they'd think you were an idiot, that they'd cut you off in mid-flow, that they would tell you where to go, that they would hang up on you. We have all of these ideas of all of these things that can go wrong. And often we play those out before we play out the alternative options, the alternative results of actually achieving success. So I'm fully aware that there's a fear around pitching to the media. But what I want to do in this episode is to take you through a few ways that actually might get rid of that fear, because in actual fact, the old school way of pitching to journalists isn't really how it's done anymore. So picking up the phone and actually calling a journalist, this is the way that we were trained to do PR. This is the way that we were doing it 15, 20 years ago. This is the traditional way that we used to have to sell in our stories. And basically, you would get between 30 and 60 seconds to pitch. You would talk as fast as you humanly could. You wouldn't stop for a breath so that they couldn't interrupt you. You would try and get all the key elements of your story out in literally one breath. So you would be covering the 5 W's in this super fast introduction. You would be trying to tell them the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. And then you would be trying to fit a brief explanation in that adds a little bit more colour as to what it's all about. That's as far as you're going to get if you are lucky. And there's a lot of pressure on getting that right because you have got such a tiny window of their attention span when you were calling them up by phone. So this is how we used to do it all the time. We used to do so much of that kind of activity. And it did work. It was effective because ultimately you are getting to make direct contact with the media. However, these days it's more unlikely that would be the way that you would approach a journalist from scratch. So unless you have an existing relationship with them, it's unlikely that actually calling them on the phone is going to be the first port of call. So that might be music to your ears, especially if you're someone who has built up this fear of journalists, who has built up this image of them being maybe these kind of grumpy old men sat smoking cigars and being all kind of superior. Or maybe you've got this image of a female editor, very sort of Devil Wears Prada type stuff. And there are some editors that are out there that are a bit like that. But actually, on the whole, when you're pitching to a journalist, it's very unlikely that you are going to be pitching to an editor in the first place. And these days, it's very unlikely that we are going to be expecting you to make a phone call to actually reach those people initially. So more often than not, you will actually be speaking to either a staff journalist or an editorial assistant, potentially, who's somebody that works within the team to sort of liaise with the outside world, with PR people, with people that can supply them with content. Or you might even be speaking to a freelancer who writes for a number of different publications. And those people are very real. Those people have actually very real challenges like we do, particularly at the moment. Many of those people are still working from home. They are trying to juggle, fitting in quite tight deadlines, being productive, being creative, in an environment which, let's be honest, isn't always all that. So if they're surrounded by dogs, kids, husbands, other stuff going on in their house, when they are trying to pull up this fabulous content, that can be a challenge for them too. So these people are just people. And that's how I want you to view journalists. I want you to start to think of them as, well, it's just Jill. It's just Bob. It's just Sue who we're trying to help out. Sue has got this massive job to pull this article together. She needs people that can provide her with expert content, or she needs people that have got a relevant story that can add some colour to her piece. And I am here to help her. And I want you to try and turn the idea of pitching on its head to actually consider it more as a route to helping the journalist out, because then you take some of the pressure off yourself and it stops feeling like this awful kind of scary sales type approach, which we know it shouldn't be anyway. And it starts to feel much more like a conversation. And that's how you need to think about pitching. You need to think about it as a conversation with another human being. You have information that is useful to them. You are trying to communicate that in a way that is very simple, straight to the point, very clear, that actually you can be of benefit to them. So that's how I want you to think about it. I want you to think about it in terms of not being a kind of a stress, not being a pressure, that you're not bugging them by getting in touch with them, that actually you can help them and you can be of service to them. So if we're not going to communicate with them by phone, what are the ways that we're going to get in touch with these journalists? Now, first of all, I would encourage you to start with social media. And the reason for that is because journalists love to hang out on social media and journalists love to communicate on social media, particularly Twitter. Twitter is their absolute social media of choice. And that's because you can't use too many words. You can't take up loads of their time. It is naturally a very fast way to communicate, to respond, to interact. And that's something that really works for them. So connecting with journalists on social media is a perfect way to start to build a relationship. And before you pitch to them, I would really recommend that you did that. I would really recommend that you actually did start to build a relationship and you start to share some of their content, reply to some of their content, support some of their content through sharing it through Twitter before you necessarily go straight diving in with your pitch. So there's a couple of ways that you can pitch to journalists on social media. You can either choose to respond to a call out that they have already put out there. So if you follow journalists on social, you will see that they will ask for comment, they will ask for case studies, they will ask for specific information that they need at that time. And you can reply to those responses, and that's a great way to get into their good books. But if you have got something very specific that you're trying to pitch to them and you want to take that to them proactively, then you need to think about how you're going to introduce that content to them. Now, ideally, as I said, this is not going to be your first interaction with them. Ideally, you have started to build a bit of a relationship with them, or at least they are aware of who you are. So when it comes to introducing yourself in terms of what you actually want to pitch to them, it's about keeping it short and sweet on social. And it's about using their DMs, if they are open, to introduce yourself in a very succinct way and really highlight what your areas of expertise are or what sort of topics your story covers, and just identify with them and say, I see that you write on these subject areas. I see that we've got an alignment and I've really enjoyed your content. And I would love to add to the conversation that you're starting around mental health, around productivity, around mums in business, around whatever it is. And try and get to them in that way that is quite conversational, whilst telling them what areas of expertise or specialism or content areas you have got to share. Now, don't give them War and Peace, give them basics, and ideally link them off to somewhere else where they can find more information. So link them off to your website or link them off to another piece where you might have already featured in the media. So give them something that gives them an essence of what you're all about. If they have got an email address, which sometimes they do put on their social profiles, then you could send more details there. So then that's when you could go in and you could send a much more fuller pitch. So talking about email pitches obviously give you more capacity, give you more opportunity to send them more information. But just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So the same premise works for email pitching. Keep it to the point, keep it short and sweet, but email pitching just means that you can attach further supporting information. So still really keep it nice and neat and clean, and don't write too much information in the email, but do feel free to attach any extra information like a media bio if you've got one that gives them that fuller story. So what are you going to pitch to them? Well, the thing to remember here is, remember when we said at the beginning, when we were learning about PR, that actually you've got to play the game and you have got to do the hard work for the journalists. So what we need to remember at this point is we need to give the journalists what they need, not necessarily what you want to write. Now, hopefully the two will be the same thing, because hopefully you've done your research and you've worked out that actually this journalist is perfectly aligned with exactly the message that you want to share and the content that you want to write. But just always come at it from that point of giving the journalists what they need, not what you want to write. So what you have to do, once you've identified the right media, you need to then think about, well, what am I actually offering? Am I offering to share my story? And if so, be very blatant about that. If you've identified that they run real life stories, that's a type of piece that fits with them, then you offer that story on a plate and you tell them exactly the key hooks of your story, and then you attach a full media bio. If you're offering them some knowledge, so if you're offering them some tips or something like that, then the thing to do is to make sure that what you're offering them fits the tone for who they write for. So you've got to make sure that it's going to be so seamless and so in line with the type of content that they need. So make sure that you are using the right kind of language, the same sort of phrases. Make sure that it just would fit absolutely seamlessly with the section that they write for. And think about the right topics to hone in on as well. And then be very, very direct about what it is you can bring to the party. So literally offer them some feature ideas. And by that, I mean, come up with some headlines, come up with some options of articles that you could provide for them, and bullet point what would be included in those pieces. So you don't necessarily have to write the entire piece, but absolutely you need to map that piece out so that it's very, very clear about what kind of content is going to be in there. So that would be my recommendation if you are going to be trying to put forward some sort of tips or advice piece. If it's more of a general kind of style article, more of a blog style article. However, if that particular journalist writes for a certain section, which is very formulaic, so some media have kind of regular sections within their publications that they just repeat week on week on week. So there's something in the UK called Solve It in 7, which is in a women's magazine. And every time the format is exactly the same. It's a little introduction to that person. It's a headshot. And then it is 7 very simple tips about how you can solve that particular problem in 7 points. So if you identified, well, actually, Solve It in 7 would be perfect for me, you would literally write the Solve It in 7 tips and you would submit it with your introduction, with your bio picture, and with your 7 tips. Because for pieces like that, they have quite a long waiting list. So there's no point in you fanning around, kind of going backwards and forward and saying, oh, I'd love to write you a Solve It in 7 tips about this. And they might think, oh, that's brilliant, but I don't really have time to reply to you to say, yes, what would it include? So if you literally hand it on a plate, they can just put it into their waiting list and they just schedule it. And that is exactly how it happens if you write it well enough. So if there's an opportunity to replicate a piece that literally is a rinse and repeat style piece, then create the entire content and send it. If it is more of a blog type article, then just go with really top line overview of what that could be, because actually they might want to change the direction of that based on what else they're covering, or make it fit with some sort of wider message that they're trying to put out that month. With that kind of content, one thing to just really hone in on when you're thinking about what the message is to your piece and what your angle is and what your headline is what is the result or the impact of somebody reading the article. So we always want to be thinking about what transformation you are going to offer as part of your advice, or what result are you offering from after someone's read that. What are they going to be able to do, or how are they going to be able to feel, or why is it a benefit for their readers to read that piece? And that's a really important part of actually identifying why you should provide some content, because you're telling the media, well, we can have this impact, we can have this effect on your audience, we can help your audience with this, or we could help them feel more like this, or we can improve their lives with this. Or actually, we're tackling a massive, bigger societal problem here, and this is part of my bigger mission, and we feel that it's important to share this message, and it feels like it was aligned with your message. So try and always give it a little bit of a bigger context as well. So it's not just your, here's my top 10 tips on this. It's like, well, why? So what? So what is something that is so powerful to ask yourself when you're doing any type of media work. So what? Why would the journalist be interested with that? Why would the reader be interested in that? Why do you care about writing that? So what? And really answer that so what question before the journalist needs to ask it. Because if they need to ask it, it's unlikely that your piece will be used. The other thing to think about when pitching to the media is timing. So don't pitch something that is necessarily topical or timely unless you're pitching it to the right type of media. So pitching something topical or timely is perfect for radio, for TV, for online, but don't try and pitch something that's topical or timely to a magazine or even to a weekly newspaper if you've not got your deadlines right. So it's a really simple thing, but it's something that people sometimes overlook and they get carried away with, again, what they think they want to write about, but just be really mindful of deadlines and of lead times and things like that. So magazines can work between 3 to 6 to 12 months in advance, depending on the publication. So it's always worth just doing that little bit of research and asking that question to see what publication they're actually working on. And it's usually pretty far in advance. You can be much more reactive and responsive, obviously, with the online stuff. And the power of that is great because it can be so instant as well. But do just consider the timings and the topical stuff that you might be pitching. That's also really great, though, to secure future PR coverage. So if you're pitching something in November, it might be actually that you're going to get covered in January or February that next year. So you're lining up marketing content for the future. So it can be a very positive thing, as well as sometimes a little bit of a frustration if you're trying to get those quick wins. So ultimately, those are some tips in terms of how you can pitch to the media, what sort of things to think about, and some of the ways that you can encourage success, some of the ways that you can actually set yourself up for success. So once you have made that connection and you have contacted that journalist, is that the end of it? Do you just sit back and wish and pray and cross all your fingers and toes and hope that that coverage is going to appear? Well, some people try that, but it doesn't work that often. So more often than not, to have success with the media, you are going to have to do a little bit of follow-up. And again, this is a bit that people are scared of. This comes back to that first date situation where it can all feel a bit awkward. You don't know really how soon to follow up. You don't really know what to say. You don't know how pushy to be. But you've got to do it, because otherwise you're not going to move forward. You're not going to move that relationship forward if you just let it die. And that's what could happen. It could just die if you don't follow it up. Because even though the media will tell you that they hate being followed up, journalists will tell you that it's a pet hate, that they hate people trying to follow up. But from our point of view, we need to know whether they have registered that information, whether they've received it or not, whether it's got lost, whether it's in their junk, whether it's been forgotten, whether it's been ignored, whether it's purposefully been deleted. We just don't know if they don't tell us. So it's so important to follow that through, because otherwise you are just absolutely just stabbing in the dark. So it is crucial to make contact again with the journalist if you don't hear anything back. But what you've got to be careful with here is how you do that. So we don't want to come across in a stalker-like way. We don't want to come across as just banging our drum and banging our head against a brick wall and just saying the same thing just lots of times, because that does get irritating and that does get annoying for them. So what we've got to think about is how with each correspondence we add more value. How with each correspondence we give more. Always give more every time you get in touch with them. Whether that's another layer to your idea, whether maybe you might support your idea with some research that you found or something that has come up in the news that's topical, or perhaps you might support it with some further tips or some extra information. So try and always look like you're following up to be helpful, that you've gone away and you've thought about how you could actually enhance what you originally offered. And sometimes they will come back and say, oh God, yeah, I love this idea. I just totally forgot about it. Or I was on deadline with something else, or I filed it for future. And just knowing that just gives you that confidence back, rather than thinking that you've just failed because you've not heard anything from them and it's all a great disaster. So follow-up is absolutely key. It's really, really important to do that follow-up in a way that has value and that has a purpose. Okay. So PR pitching does take guts. It does take resilience and it does take consistent action. But the joy that you feel when you get that yes, or when you see that piece of coverage in the newspaper or online or in a magazine, or you get the chance to do a radio interview or podcast interview, never gets old. Ever. We've been doing this for nearly 20 years and it still never gets old. We still do happy dances. We still scream and shout. It's just a feeling like no other when you have earned that media recognition. So I promise you that it is worth it. And when you get that yes, it will drive you to do more and it will drive you to get that next one. And this will just become a part of your marketing mix. And when you start to use PR on a regular basis as part of your marketing mix, that is when true magic can happen. So I hope you feel a little bit more at ease at the thought of pitching to the media. I hope you start to recognize that these are just people, and you know what, they're not as scary as you might have initially thought. And hopefully some of those tips have just made you feel like this is doable and feel like you've got a few initial first steps that you can take to start getting your content out there. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do share it with your network, because we want to get as many people as possible using the power of PR so we can spread your voices, so we can get more entrepreneurial content out there, more voices from female entrepreneurs, from startup businesses, and to share the fabulous messages that you have got. So I'm going to leave you there. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to PR Powerhouse with me, Jo Swan. If you want to feel empowered and supported and excited about getting in the press, come and join us in our free community over on Facebook at PR You Can Do It. I would absolutely love to see you there so I can help you take those next steps to getting in the media.